Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to the Wasteland Watchlist here on the SPM Crew Podcasting Network. And this is my weekly show where my guests and I play a little bit of movie roulette and randomly select something from my obscenely large, ridiculous 8,000 movie watch list, which it could be basically anything, from classic documentary short films to something that, came out last year. But joining me is filmmaker Carl Kelsch. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Shane. I'm excited to talk about this movie with you.
Absolutely. And the movie we're talking about is A Canterbury Tale, and this is from the dynamic filmmaking duo of Michael Powell and Ebert Pressburger. Uh, some of your favorite filmmakers. So those who love Martin Scorsese and have looked into his influences, Powell and Pressburger were pretty big influences on him. And this film, we have World War World War II era pilgrims investigate a bizarre crime in a small UK town while on their way to Canterbury. Now, some background here. This was released August 21st, 1944. So, like, this is dead in the middle of World War II. Runtime about 2 hours and 4 minutes. This was a mixture of British realism and German expressionism from that early era of cinema. There was a lot of neo-romantic sense of the English landscape that Powell and Pressburger were trying to get across there. There's loose thematic threads to Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, which is probably where most people thought this movie would go based off of the title, is that it was an adaptation of that. But it's more that idea of a pilgrimage together. And the cast is made up of a lot of unknowns and actual locals making this up. And I think that's very interesting because there's a lot of very like authentic feeling, small village type interactions in this film. And one thing that I want to throw out there too, so I love the documentary Made in England, the films of Powell and Pressburger, which I got to see at the Princeton Garden Theater when that came out. I think that was last summer, 2024. And basically, it's Martin Scorsese just sitting there talking about all their films throughout their career. Obviously, he's very passionate about it. And I remember him talking about this particular film and the British film, movement at the time was really trying to like reinforce morale in Great Britain because, they had been bombarded by the Germans for years, in the late 30s into the early 40s. And this film being a very British film, being supported by the British government, trying to, reinforce that morale. And I think it's very interesting how you see the effect of World War II in this film a bit. But I know, Carl, you had a particular quote that you wanted to share before we jump on into discussing the film.
Well, I think I could save it for later because I feel like it'll
Okay.
make more sense after we talk about it. But I will say I did feel that after I absorbed the film, I wanted to Google a lot of things and get some more context. And I encourage anybody who's really watching classic films. I think it's really great to sit with that for a little bit, get some
Mhm.
context. And I particularly get annoyed when I go on Letterboxd and see younger people review the 70s, 80s, and 90s movies that were all over the place when I grew up and kind of like, I don't know, just kind of sit above it and never like stop and consider the context and kind of realize that every movie that's made in a period, if it was really kind of dealing with its times, is just such a great opportunity to enter into the mindset of the period unfiltered with no rear view for them and just really see what was going on in people's heads and what people's values and what the social mores were. And there's a
Absolutely.
lot with that with this that I
Well,
loved.
yeah, I think this film, I think if you don't go in with an open mind about wanting to understand the context of how this was, I think so much power of this film comes from the context of when it came out and what this meant to British citizens at the time because these quote unquote pilgrims going on this journey are some wayward folks who are deeply connected to what's going on in the war. And even the final act of this film, when, we finally reach Canterbury and we see some of the effects of what's been happening. Because it's very interesting. So much of this film takes place in this small, like idyllic kind of small English village. And then we do wind up seeing some very real effects of what the war has done. Because, I don't think the Germans are going to be bombing little tiny villages out in the middle of nowhere. It's the cities, and you see the effect on that. And there's some powerful imagery in that.
I agree. And I think that, you know, Canterbury is literally viewable from the hill from their town of Shillingbourne,
Yep.
where this takes place mostly. And and when you get there, you do see that, there was a period of the war where historic cities were being targeted intentionally to kind of break morale. And
Yeah.
Canterbury was ravished, and actually, the cathedral itself was saved by people on fire watch, which is, again, like something I kind of had to Google to make sure I
Yeah.
understood what that was when a character says that they've been on fire watch.
Well, and those types of things play important pieces into the whole entire story and the mystery of what's going on here. And what I found so fascinating, because to be honest, I didn't know if this was supposed to be like a literal modern day adaptation of like the Canterbury Tales or not, but I appreciate the thematic connection that Palin Pressburger makes of like what like a war would make a bunch of people, a bunch of wayward souls traveling and going across places. And these three individuals would never wind up in the same place if it weren't for what's going on in the war, because you have this interesting, you have you have British soldier, and you have American soldier, and you have this young woman, and they're all winding up in this very specific town for whichever reason, some by accident, you know, that very relatable moment of you hear something and you think it's your stop on a train and you get off and you're just
Yep.
like, oh no, I got off on the wrong stop. And I know anytime I've gone into New York City and I've used the subway, I'm just like, oh my God, I have to be paying like super attention that I don't get off at the wrong place. And because of something simple like that, kind of pushes this whole entire film into motion.
And in the very first few minutes is our inciting incident in which, as this trio are making their way to check in with the local magistrate, the woman in their group, she gets glue put on her hair by some guy in the dark, and he bolts off, and they try to chase him, and they realize that he might have snuck into the very same building that they are meeting the magistrate
Yeah.
in. And this woman's name is Allison Smith, and her desire to find out who did this is the engine of most of the story. And I think this is what threw me so off guard and made this a strange watching experience, because, again, this is roulette. I don't
Yeah.
know if I would have picked this film. And I had this very little summary that, maybe on Letterboxd or IMDb, that said something about three people investigating a strange crime. Other things have said petty crime in other summaries
Yeah.
that I read after, and I realized that I was expecting, like, I was like, when is this crime going to happen? This
Then
glue hair
realizing
incident.
it's just like it's like somebody got glued. We have to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah,
And I think that's such an interesting stark contrast too, because like there's a war going on and this story's focusing on somebody got glue put in their hair, which is like child like those are child things that you do. Like that's what a little boy would do to like a girl he likes in elementary school, like shoving glue in their hair and doing silly stuff like that. And it's such an interesting, inciting incident for the
yeah.
rest of the story.
The other key detail is that this culprit has on a soldier's uniform,
Yep.
so it's making people wary of the soldiers. It's making young women wary of being around soldiers. But I will say, looking back at the film now, and I really it's fresh in my mind. I finished it this morning.
Yep.
Um, it's really like all the descriptions like took me away from what the tone really is, and I think it's a light tone for much of the movie,
Yeah.
and and that is because the mystery has very low stakes, and for really a lot of the movie I was like, this is a problem, like this is making me wonder like why this movie is so beloved and all this stuff, and I was puzzling to me as a writer. It really was, because it kind of breaks a lot of rules about. At the same time, they go through all the beats of like an investigation where it's
Yeah.
check in with all the victims, get the times of the crimes, and by 40 minutes and then by 60 minutes, it's all kind of narrowing into one suspect, and we'll get into that in a minute.
Yeah.
But really settling back and absorbing the context right after watching a movie, I was like, they want to make a movie that acknowledges the war is going on. They also want to make a movie that is light entertainment in some ways and spends a lot of time in that space of people having a break from the war in this town and a break from the oppressiveness of the war in this town. And I think it also needed an unconventional tone to let you connect the current times to deep history of England, which I think is the film does with the little prologue that actually shows the pilgrims,
Yeah.
cleverly cuts to modern day from a falcon to a fighter plane in the sky. And it's that's what none of the descriptions set up for me, that there's a lightness and a subtle, laid back energy to this movie, and you just would not think that. And I think it's very intentional, and must have really, you know, kind of was part of what would how would they get people into this movie to see this theater and get
Yeah.
the healing effects of what they're going for with the story arc.
And I think it's very interesting because it does work on those two layers of one. Why wouldn't all the people in this small town want to, kind of get lost in this situation? It's like, why think about that we're all being bombarded by bombs and everything when it's like somebody's gluing people. We need to get to the bottom of this. And I think there's something very feeling and this collective experience for this town to come together over something that isn't world ending, because that's what the war was. This is the war to end all wars. This was something that was such a dangerous thing, and especially for the British, who were being directly attacked for years up to this point. But then the metacontextual nature of like Alan Pressburger knows that the British people watching this film about the British people during the war also need that escape of like my home might be gone because it was bombed, or my loved ones are dead because they were bombed. And you have this story that is very playful and light, and it has some of those fun moments of like they rope the kids into it, they're
Yeah,
on the investigation. And I love that dynamic that they have like the general, the one little kid, and they
yeah,
each have their own roles and stuff like that. And without that kind of context of like, wow, this is supposed to be about like during World War II, it's like this is a fun little story in a small town. And I loved all the little quiet moments with the townsfolk, like even just the American soldier connecting over trades, doing like trade work and stuff like that, and just knowing a certain type of wood and having that kind of connection. Everything felt so authentic to me watching this, and I was very charmed by all the characters that made up this town. And you know, it was I was going for a while being like, okay, the main things that I knew about this film were in the third act once they get to Canterbury. And so much of this film is this nice, easy process of trying to solve this. And then, it transitions into there's some interesting context to why this is happening.
absolutely.
And the reason that the culprit is doing this thing, and it's fascinating how it links to the bigger, broader context of the war. And you would never think that it would. Like, there wouldn't be a reason. Why would World War II be influencing somebody to be throwing glue on women's hair?
Right.
But there's a powerful scene on a train, in a train car, where you just kind of finally get context to this, where it's just like, huh, it really, it's such a powerful scene because it shifts the focus of the film as a whole, and
Yeah.
it opens the door for where the film takes us at the end.
Yeah. And again, since I kind of haven't seen the documentary, didn't know where the third act was going.
Yep.
So the writer, I love pausing and seeing like what stage in the movie certain like turning points happen. I pause it in this train scene where they've narrowed down the culprit, they've solved the mystery, they're confronting the person. You know, it's like this the classic Scooby Doo. You're gonna
Yeah.
unmask the perpetrator and get them to have to say their reasons. And I pause it and I'm like, there's like good 27 minutes left in this movie, and I'm like, I, what's going to happen if they decide he's not so threatening now, they're going to work with him for his goals. I had no idea what was going to happen.
Yeah.
So as a writer, only when I got to the end could I appreciate, okay, they had to make this mystery, this plot engine, around something very light, so that in a way, once that scene happens, that's actually all resolved. And I think that only then could I kind of see that character of the magistrate, Culpepper, Thomas
Yeah.
Culpepper, um, probably a little more like the audience who watched it saw it, because I was just so into like he's the villain. He's
Yeah.
like, in a way, he presides over the town as a, um, force of good that's like tapped into its history, that runs this lecture that has nothing suspicious about it. But I couldn't get over like just this idea that the film needed me to be suspicious, and also I think cynical, like, oh, he's an upstanding person, so he's going to be unmasked to be like a scoundrel who's really against everything that he's about. And I think that, again, it's just like a modern lens, maybe going into this movie, that just sort of tilted things away and made it even more jarring for me to go into this third act. But in a way, it kind of made it actually more special to be confused. You know, we don't get that very often.
Well, and that was such a powerful moment. And even because we spend a lot of time, obviously, we spend a lot of time with these three quote unquote pilgrims who are experiencing this town, getting to know the people. And even Allison has these pretty special moments with Culpepper. And there was, I think, the moment where I really felt like this is a Powell and Pressburger film, because I I guess my give a little context. My first experience with them was Black Narcissus, and I this was the most unassuming way, and this is going to sound terrible. So I was on a 10-hour drive with my brother to go down to North Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I downloaded a whole bunch of movies from like Criterion Channel, or that might have been Filmstruck at the time before it actually became Criterion Channel. Anyway, and
Yeah.
one of them was that film, and I wish that I did not watch that on a phone for the first time, but but
Yeah, it's so beautiful.
it's it's such a beautiful film. And then I saw the Red Shoes, and like Matter of Life and Death slash Stairway to Heaven, however you
And
want to
those are the
title the
three.
film.
Those are the only three I think that I've seen.
Yeah,
So,
and they're so gorgeous. And the color is so important to those films too. So I thought this was going to be a very interesting experience, seeing this black and white film from them. And where was that beauty going to come in? Because there are some absolutely gorgeous black and white films out there. And the moments when they're up in the hills and she thinks she hears stuff, and then it turns out to be him, or kind of maybe a little bit of
mhm.
it was. There's a bit of mystery, a bit of magic,
Yeah.
something, a bit of magical realism going on there. But the gorgeous shots of those hills and the wind and the sky and the landscapes. I'm just like, there it is. This is absolutely gorgeous. And that was reinforced even more in the third act when we just felt the weight. Like of that cathedral, there's just something majestic of scale about it. And the way that they shot it was absolutely breathtaking.
It
Like there's
starts
no,
off we're in a
yeah,
tunnel. It starts off we're in a
yeah,
tunnel and it's framing it in mostly black with you seeing through it, and then the camera moves forward out of the tunnel. It's again, yeah, very, very strategic.
absolutely. There's something extremely dynamic about how a lot of moments in Canterbury really come to life. And there's that, I think there was that one camera shot. It's like going through and looking through this like designed lattice and everything and just looking, peering out of it was just, I'm like, that's a gorgeous shot. And it's so funny because when I watch movies with my wife, I'll just make off comments. I'm like, that was a great shot. When
Yeah,
I'm just watching movies and stuff, I'm like, I was watching this by myself one night this week, and I'm just like, I just said to myself, that was a great shot.
yeah. And I think that there's, I think this is like really specific to just, viewing something on streaming, but I'm sitting here pausing this movie and this like poster shot that, is the image that the streamer uses is a
Yeah,
shot of the character Allison Smith standing on the hill and this it's in color. The hills have that beautiful, rich color and like light streaming through the clouds. And I'm like, what movie are they marketing here? Because it's not the movie that I'm seeing. It's so
yeah,
strange. And then you get to this point where, again, she finally is about to learn for sure that it's the person that she thinks it is, Culpepper. The two soldiers are on their way to see her and
yeah,
tell her, and she's sitting with him. And as a writer, it is like this brilliant like thing of like, well, what's really going to happen?
yeah,
She can find out here that he's the villain of the story so far, who actually did, throw glue on her hair. He's acting really nice. He says something really weird, like I've changed my mind about you," and like I can't help but I think like when she hides from the soldiers, like I honestly feel like she's in danger and he's going to hurt her, and I think the script intends for you to have that
yeah,
ambiguity. Um, but because the movie has not really been prettified, it's been presented in good cinematography, but nothing really ethereal about the setting is held until this scene, so it feels like something big is about to happen. And then the cinematography in Canterbury itself again continues this very calculated sense of creating this majesty and awe. And I really do think they intentionally withhold that tone for the
yeah,
whole first two-thirds of the movie to make you really understand what it would mean to move into a special place that has a spiritual foundation. And that's why, like, looking at the high marks of this, people's scores on this movie and the marketing, I was like, I could not even like align it with what I was seeing for the first two-thirds of this movie. And it's so interesting to see them make such a strong choice to like make the small town. It's small, quirky, very, very
mhm,
pedestrian sense of point of view and even storytelling. Again, like really pedestrian kind of storytelling
yeah,
of just like this is a procedural, this is like a little crime mystery, and pull the rug out from under you when they all kind of coincidentally have to go to Canterbury at the same time. You don't even know that
yeah,
that's where the film's going. They all just kind of have to go on the same day for three different reasons, and
yeah.
fourth if you consider Culpepper. Um, and it doesn't feel like such a contrivance because when you get there, all the payoffs are so interesting.
I have to give Callum Pressburger such credit for the restraint of being able to make that turn when they needed it to, and reinforcing the themes of the film and reinforcing just how they wanted to present this story. And because the third act feels so big, but it's like scale wise, you have this cathedral, you have this city, the scale is different, but it's still so very intimately human because each of these characters has this catharsis that feels so earned because we just spent all this time getting to know them and having these fun, quaint little shenanigans in this village, and then them all finally getting to where they needed to go.
Yeah.
And I was very moved by the time I got to the end of this film. And there's very few films that purposefully have something looming in the background and are I don't think distracting is the right word, but like a framing in a
Misdirecting.
certain misdirecting for like two-thirds of the movie just to like pull the rug out from under you and make you realize what this has all been really about. And not to take some shots at Martin Scorsese because one of his films that I love watching, but it frustrates me so much is Gangs in New York. And at least for my experience watching that film, he doesn't stick the landing doing that in that film because for two-thirds of it, it's like this is a revenge story. But at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, it's really about the war and racism and all of these bigger, broader context of America at the time. And, it's very interesting realizing like the influences that he has from Powell and Pressburger, but like if somebody were to ask me to show them a great example of a film misdirecting and coming into full view in the third act, like this is a great example of that. And it's done so subtly and it's so refined and it's like very British in terms of
Yeah.
like that kind of restraint because like I do love I've watched a lot of British television in particular, but like I do love British filmmakers and storytellers, and it's just that kind of restraint with everything and then finally letting it come into view. It was just so impactful by the end, and I'm glad I finally got to see this because it's a beautiful film and it's a
Yeah.
very human film and it's fun. It's airy and light until it needs to focus and show you what this is, why that light airiness was so important at the time. And then it just hits you. Like the moment where it's Gibbs, right, who's the one who winds up being able to play the organ in
Correct.
the
Yeah.
cathedral and everything. Peter, and just like that's such a special moment. It feels like they all came to this place for a reason and they were destined to be there. And isn't that the whole idea of a pilgrimage is that you have some kind like you're meant to make this journey. And I think Powell and Pressburger really reinforced that so well in this film.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that they give that this character who's mysterious and maybe
Yep.
seems villainous or not, is sort of like always speaks and acts in a way that kind of like hints that he has this kind of like God's eye view of
Mm,
them and their situation and their characters changing by the town that they're in. Kind of just preside and be the kind of the human face that opens your mind up to that feeling that's creeping in the last third. Um, I also think just as Americans, it's very hard. Like that's another place where I was seeking context was just like this reminder of like we, spend, we've anybody our age has kind of spent a life sheltered from direct contact with war for a lot of the part,
yeah.
for the most part, and even the sense of like you know our with the exception of just a few cities that are ever being attacked directly. But even just a history as deep and as long that when like a town like Canterbury gets bombed, the real morale sinking quality that must have had in people just knowing, oh, they're targeting our monuments, they're targeting our sacred sites that can't be rebuilt, and it's happening in countries now, but it's like hard for us to really understand like what sort of attack on the soul of a country that really is. And
Yeah.
that's why when I found this paragraph from um, a Guardian at the critic at the Guardian named Zan Brooks, he did a little essay on it being one of his favorite films, and he says, "A Canterbury Tale may be the most loving and tender film about England ever made. It's a picture that's steeped in nature, enthralled to mystery and history, a reaffirmation of English character, customs, and countryside from a time when many viewers may have wondered whether this underpinning had been kicked clean away, but the film's genius lies in the way it connects these big sweeping themes to the intimate and eccentric in the everyday." And well, I mean, I kind of wish I'd read like that quote before I saw the movie because I
Yeah.
think it would have actually put me in the right headspace. But but there's a lot to absorb and think about
Yeah.
after, and a good movie makes you dig deeper.
Well, and I watched this 2 nights ago, and this has been sitting with me and making me really think about this. And it just gets me even more excited to check out more of their films
Yeah,
because I more and more that I watch of their work, I realize like how much their work connects with me. And this, I appreciate you sharing that quote from that review because it does give a lot of context. And, you know, this is this beautiful love letter to England at a time where people needed to be reminded that they weren't just this shell of what they used to be after being bombarded for years and a lot of their culture and a lot of their history being destroyed. And I think that's one of like the aftermath of World War II, so much history and culture was destroyed
yeah,
across Europe. And that's such an interesting little layer of this experience. And it's really impressive that this film works on such a small scale, intimate level and just such a big sprawling sense of thematic work. But this I can see why this film has stood the test of time and is so beloved because it does something that not a lot of I don't think a lot of films can really stick that landing as well as what this film did.
yeah. I also would classify it under the rare category of films that have, a spiritual intention that goes beyond any religious faith or
Yeah,
religious belief. Anyone could watch this film and take away this idea that, getting through a difficult time isn't so much about like whether a miracle is handed to you, but like whether you can put your mindset into something um, different that and and kind of connect with people around that to like set a spark that actually changes the mood.
I do appreciate the spirituality of this and that scene in the hills felt like one of those moments. It felt like Allison was having a moment
Yeah.
of clarity and I think because up to that point they were so had said I'm like we need to get
Hmm.
this villain doing this. And then I don't know how that discussion on that train would have went if she didn't have that kind of moment.
Yeah.
And that moment with him and discuss like talking to him. And I just love the characters of this too. They did such a great job of capturing some really authentic, genuine characters that feel like people.
Yeah.
This feels like a town full of people.
Writing wise, I just want to center back on that moment on the hill too, because here's a character. Allison Smith's character is a little saintly, very very like she's a little bit saintly, and she's very smart, and she's always very on track of what the next clue she has to get, and she seems like the wisest, smartest person. She asserts that she should get to go to the the lecture with all the male soldiers, and that it's
Yeah.
totally normal for her to be there. So she feels progressive. She feels kind of perfect. So when she is sitting next to this person who we were like, okay, she's about to find out that he put glue in her hair. And she even knows that this is likely the case. And she's following her instinct and leaning into him physically and speaking to him in a way that's very gentle and open. Um, I feel like so many of the themes in the movie are right there, and it's her character being that way that gives that moment its strength because you're like, she's doing something that's against our impulse to want to see her. We're worried about her, but it just is that thing of like, if you on your gut level, we know where the goodness and the evil is around us, and she's deciding that this person's not evil, and she's
Yeah,
leaning into him, and yeah, and because they set it up with so many other factors in, it makes it a very, very clear thematic statement for the movie.
absolutely. Because it's like there's true evil
Yeah,
in the world, especially at that time, that's causing so much death and destruction. And this just turns out to be somebody, meaning good, but, choosing a very interesting way of trying to do good in his own perspective. He's not a bad person. It
yeah,
just making some interesting decisions
yeah,
of how he's trying to do right by things. And that is such a powerful moment. His motivations and why he was doing that, and the moment where he says his thoughts of her has changed, has so much power because he trusts her,
yeah,
and he doesn't see her as a threat
yeah.
to his men and to the movement and what needs to happen to protect Britain and stuff like that. But yeah, I I don't know if I have much else to add. I guess, Carl, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, but I think that I like that. I think this is a movie that there's a lot to talk about afterwards. Like, how
Yeah.
did you take it as you were watching it? And you know, and again, like, what did it make you reflect on afterwards? And I really liked hearing, where it kind of took your brain, and a lot of overlap between what we thought.
Well, and there's, as a film lover, there's few things as good a feeling of having like a good conversation with somebody after watching a movie
Yeah,
and really discussing it. And I thought this was a great conversation and a film that I hope people go check this out. I did watch this on the Criterion channel. I'm assuming a lot of their films are on the Criterion channel. I know a lot of them are in the Criterion collection, and I would love to add this one to my. I think I have four Howl specific because like I have Peeping Tom too, and that was just him doing that
mhm.
from the Criterion collection, but added it to my uh wish list to add to all my movies that I have around here. But Carl,
But
thank you so much for coming
yeah,
on and chatting about A Canterbury Tale with me.
thank you. Yes, it was a delight.
And thank all of you for listening. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this episode. What is your favorite, you know, have you ever gone on a journey exploring a filmmaker because one of your favorites mentioned them? I know I definitely started expanding this because getting to watch that documentary about them and because Scorsese talks about Michael Powell especially so much. And make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. The SPM Crew Podcasting Network is ever expanding. We have so many great shows with a lot of different interests, especially movies. So if you love movies, we got plenty of that. And if you want to join the crew because you want to be a guest, like on this show in particular, the Wasteland Watchlist, or any of our other shows, or you have an idea for a podcast, you want a place to, get it started, reach out to us on our website. And if you like our logo, check out High Flyer Creative for all your digital marketing needs. But most importantly, thank you as always for tuning in and supporting the Wasteland Watchlist here on the SPDM Crew Podcasting Network.